Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Hey Man, It's Okay. I'm Sky Bridges,
And I'm Ryan Heapy.
and we are here with another very special episode of Hey Man, It's Okay. We're getting into this new season of Hey Man, It's Okay, and we thought we should start it off with a bang. So we brought in a very special guest, and we'll discuss the topic after we bring him on. We welcome Dr. Ryan Lee. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ryan.
Hey, good to see you guys.
Yeah, you as
Like,
well. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
yeah. Well, Dr. Ryan, we've heard that your specialty is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, in sort of religious cults, helping people manage getting out of them, what that process is like. So maybe tell us a little bit about your work, how you found yourself in it, and you find most rewarding, or what's your real purpose in doing this work.
Yes, my specialization is working with people from high control religions, cults, or even sometimes mainstream religions that perhaps had a negative effect on some of the people that went there. And yeah, I work a lot with working through religious trauma, which I can talk a little bit right now if you want. Is in terms of that process, there's different phases. There's people that come to me and realize that the religion they're a part of is clearly not for them, or they don't believe in it, but they have some kind of residual programming that they want to work on. A lot of times it's working on the effects of what it's like to be outside that community. A lot of these high control or religions or cults, they have a shunning policy, and that has a significant impact on the people that decide to leave, because it's not just re-examining their world beliefs and whether they believe in God and what do they believe in, what they want to do on this earth, but it's simultaneously dealing with this loss of connection with their community. And so I got into the work because I myself was raised in a high control religion. And it was one of those things I just wanted to find a way to make lemonade out of lemons. I had a pretty negative experience myself and had to put a lot of work into myself to sort of reintegrate into the world and live a healthy, fulfilling life. And when I first started doing the work, it was a lot like a lot of typical therapy, where it's holding space for pain, trauma, processing trauma, and that kind of thing. And I still do that, of course. But more and more lately, I've really gotten excited about growth. Really how we can take people that have this experience and facilitate the process of expansion and discovery and what do I want to do. And it's interesting because one of the unique things that people have in this position is something that a lot of people don't get. Most people, they're raised in a religion and it's not particularly negative, and it's just, well, I'm Catholic or I'm Christian or whatever. And that also comes with a lot of different values and beliefs that never really get questioned. There's never a reason to question because life's just kind of floating along, moving along. But people that come from these high control religions, especially if they were born into them, as difficult and challenging as this can be, they have this beautiful opportunity to like really strip everything back and be like, wait a minute, what is this thing called life? Like, what do I want to do here? How do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? What are the ways that I have thought of as myself that are actually ways that I've been programmed to be? And so they have this beautiful opportunity to start from a blank slate. And that's really exciting to me.
It's almost like it's a rebirth in a lot of ways. And to your point, one of the things I was talking to Sky about before was, what is the difference between, and it sounds like it's high control, but yeah, what is the difference between, I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, K through 12, all boys school, as a matter of fact, my 3 years of high school. And there's, one could make a case that there are some high control uh, type environments there, or some of the indoctrination that goes. I mean, Catholic shame is a very big and well-known issue. So
Mm.
yeah, what would you, and then really touching on kind of that finding yourself
Yeah.
again and starting from scratch in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It's really about the level of control. Most religion in general has some very similar elements, but there's varying degrees to which it's enforced, the levels of the amount of rules, the amount of restrictions, the amount of thought control, behavior control. And I don't know if that was a good time to go into it, but Stephen Hassan has this beautiful model called the bite model.
It's a perfect time to
That
go into it.
really, okay, great. Yeah, it's a really beautiful way of outlining the distinction. When we can use high control religion, we can use the cult, whatever we want to use, but it's really talking about the very kind of consistent, almost cookie cutter ways that you will be able to recognize something that is a high control religion or a cult. So again, the bite model is from Dr. Stephen Hassan. He's a mental health counselor and a cult expert for many years. And it basically looks at the underlying mechanics of cult groups aside from the varying flavors. What they believe in, what God they believe in, that's sort of the flavor. But the underlying mechanics are about explaining how authoritarian and high control groups manipulate and control people. So the BITE model is an acronym, and it outlines 4 categories of control used by cults or high control religions to dominate their followers' behavior, thinking, emotions, and access to information. So the acronym stands for B for behavior, I for information, T for thought, and E for emotional control. And yeah, I'll just take a little time to go through some of examples of each of these categories, but please, by all means, jump in and stop me if you have any questions. So let's start with behavioral control, B. This is the way in which these organizations will control an individual's physical reality and activities. And a lot of times it will dictate the way the person lives their day-to-day life in an almost constant basis. So there may be strict schedules for daily activities such as work or worship and sleep. There's an enforced obedience and submission to rules or leadership, usually enforced by those within a position of authority in the group. But it's also worth mentioning that for most of these groups, there's also this kind of social mechanism that exerts this social pressure to keep everyone in line, and a general culture of exposing or reporting people that step out of line to the authorities.
Would you say almost like confession? I'm going to kind of maybe filter some of this through like my Catholic upbringing. Would the process of confession, talking to the priest in this, closed booth, is somewhat a form of control, or what would you, where would you maybe give an example of what that behavioral control would look like?
Yeah, well, why don't we take that one and I can tell you what it would look like
Ah,
under a high control situation.
wow.
Um, Generally speaking, if you're a Catholic, maybe you go to church on Sundays. If you miss a Sunday,
Mhm.
nobody's going to speak to you about it. If you go to confession, you understand that's part of the thing, and there's generally some choice that you want to go to confession because that fits within your ideology. If it was a high control situation, it would be this brother or sister has not gone to confession in a week. They missed confession last week. We need to talk to them. And if they're not receptive to the pressure that we're putting on them to go to confession, well, we're going to go to the priest. And the priest is
Mhm.
going to sit you down, and maybe there's going to be a group of priests, and they're going to sit around in a
Wow.
circle and have a
Wow.
big discussion about why you haven't gone to confession. And then if you still decide that you don't want to go to confession, then they're going to amp it up and say, well, maybe we're going to have to remove you from the church and not speak to you ever again. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? There are
Yeah.
these
Wow. Yeah.
levels of enforcement to make
Mhm.
sure that people are following the behavior
Mhm.
as opposed
Intense.
to,
Yeah.
yeah,
And possibly with some punishment.
yeah. And the punishment is usually some kind of social punishment, either shaming them off, and it's not so unusual to be publicly. Well, they'll make some announcement about this person and their behavior,
Mhm.
or there'll be what I call soft shunning, which is not a full block, but people in the congregation will distance themselves from you,
Mhm.
and again, there's that social pressure there, or of course, full blown shunning. So yeah, so I'll just add a
Yeah.
couple more things.
Yep.
Behavior
Yep.
control, you may see
Mhm.
rigid rules around the way people dress, what kind of social connections they have, media, what kind of media they watch, and basically opinions you can have, personal expression, and yeah, yeah, that's just a
And
few examples of the kind of behavioral. Then there's,
and
I'm
then,
sorry, did you have a
yeah.
question?
No, no, no. I want to hear the I. Yeah. I think
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
So I is information
Yeah.
control, and I touched on that a little bit with
Mhm.
the control of what kind of books, what kind of information. But basically, it's generally geared around controlling access to outside information that might contradict the ideas of the group and limit the individual's ability to evaluate their own beliefs or think critically about the group. They'll often censor, distort, or restrict access to outside knowledge. They'll limit access to media, like I mentioned. I think I already mentioned too, also, encouraging spying on other members and reporting dissent. They might withhold controversial information about the group to newer members of the group until they're more deeply indoctrinated. They'll also be, using propaganda, creating us versus them type of narratives. And very often there's excessive emphasis on absorbing a steady flow of literature published by the group. So it's limiting outside information, but overdoing it on the inside information. And they sort of assign themselves as the source of truth and the one place that you go to. If you need to learn about other religions, you can't go to other religions and check them out. We're going to tell you what those religions are about and tell you why they're wrong and tell you why we're right. That kind of thing.
What were some of these maybe that you experienced in your journey that were really impactful? Or at what point maybe did you start to question or recognize, some of these tactics, I guess, being used?
Yeah, the organization that I came from had all of these qualities. And I was fully indoctrinated until I was around 17. And a few things happened around that time where the first thing that there was the chip in the armor was my mother was married to my stepfather was physically abusive, significantly so. He fractured her arm at one point. And this organization does not believe in divorce, pretty much under no circumstances, unless it's life-threatening, something like that. But they would repeatedly tell my mother that this was not a situation that warranted a separation because technically her life was not in danger. So that was one of the first things, like something.
And even that is
right here.
Very subjective, right? Who makes that determination of what's life-threatening and what's not?
Yeah, for sure. And that threshold, it's up there because they prioritize doctrine over everything. But then, I was told that the people outside of this organization were evil and controlled by the devil. And I had a point in high school, so we weren't allowed to do any sort of social activities outside of school. But there was a class being offered in a theater class. So technically I was able to do it because it was within school. And I just started making friends. They were really nice and they embraced me, and I was a spazzy kid and they loved me. And I was like, these people are great. Like, what are you talking about?
Where's the devil?
So yeah. So there was lots of other little things. But those were the two big things. And then it was this kind of watershed moment that I was just like, oh, this is nonsense. Like it occurred to me like, oh, you're telling me there's 400 religions in the world and all of them believe that they're right. And I'm in the one that is the only one that is right. Like, this is nonsense. And then I had a good amount of time redefining what sinning is.
I imagine that had to have been a really tough situation going through at that age, because you're probably still with your parents who are still there within the organization. So how did you approach that as you were going into that like realization that it wasn't for you anymore?
I'll be honest, I was really lucky, and I don't always share this with the clients because most of my clients, this process is really rough, really painful. I was lucky because my mom at that time decided to leave as well. So I didn't really have to deal with the shunning. And then it was honestly, most of it for a while was like, oh my God, I can just do it. So many things I can do, So that was exciting. However, after a few years, it caught up with me. And I didn't really deal with the trauma of the whole experience. I went into a deep depression, and I had my suspicions about therapy, but I was like, I don't know. It's a thing that I guess helps. And luckily I found a great therapist and like did some really good work and continued to over the years to just
And
do
at what age?
programming. And yeah.
What age did all that occur?
When I sought therapy,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was around 27, so almost 10 years after I left.
Okay. Yeah. And what
But
was it? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
no, I just wanted to say it
Yeah.
was, again, it was all fun to do all those sort of things, but when you haven't resolved that kind of existential questions of what are you doing here? What's your purpose? Why, you know what I mean? As well as emotional issues, the excitement only goes so far. You going to ask another question?
Yeah. I had a friend who was a Jehovah's Witness, and we got to spend a lot of time together. He was about, 7, 8 years, I think, removed from the church. And I was already, kind of well into being a therapist and hadn't really given this a whole lot of thought. I watched Netflix shows. There's like Wild Country was one of my favorites about the Rajneesh, I think they're called. And it was just fascinating for me and sort of to have my eyes opened, to really meet and talk to somebody who was programmed in so many ways drastically differently from I guess, what I knew was kind of the modern or common world. And so, you know, I don't know, it took a different form of empathy for me to really understand or even just begin to understand what it might be like for somebody to sort of grow up in a world that's so drastically different from mine. And then not only have to deal with all of the shame, to deal with the lack of trust, but to have to then figure out what's true, what's not true, how much of this past religion do I bring with me? Is any of that relevant? The, there's still our country is founded upon Christian values. And so part of that might still seem very real or valid. And yet there's so much of this re-examination, this exploration of this world that you've been kept from. I wouldn't even, I had no idea where he would begin, how someone would start to embark. Who do you start to believe? What do you believe? Do you start watching TV and listen to the news? Do you tune into YouTube? Is any of that true? Especially today's day and age, I think we have less trust in any of our institutions in general. And so if you're leaving behind what was once your foundation and your structure, man, I couldn't imagine what that's like for people to have to go through.
It's really intense. And therapy is awesome. And it was great for me, but I had the same experience that almost everyone else has, which is they'll try to talk about this piece and the therapist just can't wrap their head around it. It's just, there's so much to it. Or they'll kind of say, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I was a Baptist or whatever. And you're like, yeah, but no, it's not. It's deeper than that. And it's fundamental. And so, yeah, like you're saying, that's one issue of like figuring out who to listen to, who to trust. Most people go through this process. They leave because they're so wired to be seeking external validation all the time and make all of their decisions based on external rules. That when they don't have that, they're like, I don't know what to do with myself. And so generally there's some phase where it's like, all right, maybe I need to find the right religion. But more often than not, people have this experience where they realize, oh, all religions are the same, in what they're offering. And so for me, it was I went through a process where I was like, okay, everything I've been taught is not true. And everyone in the world doesn't seem to really know what's true either. They're just kind of going according to what they know. So I remember going through this process of like, going, okay, let's start with, what do I know? Okay, I am here. This is happening right now. I am here. I exist. And then I went to like, okay, the sun comes up every day. Okay, I'm pretty sure that's true. I need money. I need food to survive, and I need money to get food. So I will therefore need to get a job. Like really building from the ground up.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow. Yeah.
it's intense.
I think we lost the train somewhere because I don't think we finished out the bite method.
Oh yeah, sure. We
I think
can
we only
jump
got through
back to
B
that.
and I.
Yeah, so we went through behavioral control, information control. T is for thought control, and it's about manipulating how people think and what they're allowed to believe. It's meant to create a mindset which only the group's ideology is acceptable, and it tends to replace critical thinking with dogma or concepts like faith. You know, there's generally a little bit of play for asking questions that they have well-rehearsed answers to. But if you start pushing or asking questions that they don't have an answer, it'll immediately go towards like, well, you have to have faith, and this is where we have to trust. And, you know, it tends to, as far as thinking, encourages very black and white, us versus them thinking, uses loaded language or cliches to stop critical thought. The outside world is evil. People are evil. There's a fear of questioning or doubting the group's teachings. There's almost always some kind of line of only we have the truth. Everyone else is living a lie. The world is a lie, but we have the truth with a capital T. And then, yeah, of course, discouraging or punishing individual thinking or dissent.
Such as like excommunication.
Yes, that's the ultimate form,
Okay.
which really is so powerful. There's a reason why one of the worst punishments, you know, where they'd get those options in the old days, like death or exile. And some people would just choose death because to be cut off from your community, we don't even realize how important those connections are. And it can be, I don't like to use the word devastating because it implies broken or something you can't come out of. But it's one of the deepest pains to go through. I mean, it's a challenge.
Wow.
It seemed like it
just kind of, maybe speak on that real quick. What you might be familiar with this, but like one of the longest psych studies, I think just maybe research studies ever done is this Harvard study that was started in 1943. And they've surveyed everybody from a president to the poor. And what they found, it's still going on today, was that the greatest common denominator, of a physically, emotionally, mentally, happy, fulfilled life was the quality of our connections. That was a better determining factor than cholesterol, heart disease, genetics, you name it. And so it's fascinating just how powerful the emotion of shame is. And I've heard that we have shame evolutionarily keep us in the tribe, that it's that one thing, that one feeling. I believe emotions communicate something to us. And it's that feeling that lets us know if we're doing right or wrong, or if we're doing right or wrong by other people a lot of times. And that gets so manipulated and twisted kind of in these cults. And it's almost maybe that emotion, maybe would you say, more than any other that is maybe preyed upon.
Oh yeah, that is the biggest thing they have over you. There's so many people that there's no way of knowing the numbers, but I feel confident that at least probably a third of the people who are still in these organizations are only there because the option is to leave and lose their family. So that they just sort of say, I guess this is life now, and they just sort of put on the mask and they go along with the whole thing because it is the biggest thing. Everything else, all the other stuff that I work with people on is I have a dozen angles to work through, to grow, to kind of come out of. This piece is the most resistant to solutions. And it's really just about grief, like a death. But it's almost like a death. It's a very personal death because it's not, death takes us all, and that's not personal. It just happens. But when somebody creates a death between you, it does feel personal. And when it's everybody in your family, it's just, there's just pain that needs to be felt.
It's got to be even more maddening because those people are still alive. At least with death, it's very concrete. There's no way to talk to that person again. You know
Right.
what happened. Uh,
Yeah.
They got sick. They got hurt. When you're excommunicated, these people are very much still there. And you're the one who's done the unthinkable, the unspeakable. And yet I couldn't imagine again, really, for me and maybe the audience, of just wrapping your heads around how, yeah, maddening, maybe is the word to describe what it's like to leave all your friends behind, leave all your family behind in search of truth and freedom, agency.
Yeah, it's the biggest obstacle. And I'll say a couple of things. One,
Yeah.
as much as it hurts, provided people are willing to do the work and really lean into it and feel what needs to be felt, they do come out of that. When they do build authentic relationships with people who it's not dependent on their religious beliefs. And even when people are going through the worst of it and a really hard time, I'll ask them sometimes, I'll say, do you want to go back? Because you can go back. They will always accept you if you want to go back. And that's always a nice sort of baseline because
Yeah.
every time they're like, oh, no, definitely not. Like it's immediate no. So they're like, I don't know how I'm going to figure out the rest of this. But going back is a no, which to me speaks to, as hard as it can be, really engaging with life and finding your agency and your freedom and living it is still so much more valuable.
That almost surprises me a little that people don't go back as often. And my, again, limited knowledge is comparing it to an abusive relationship, right? And we know so many people will go back to an abusive relationship because there's some comfort there, there's some love there, and and also the feeling of being alone on the other side of that can sometimes be far worse, can feel far worse, right, than being in that that drama. Right.
There are people that go back. None of my clients do. Now, I'm not saying, I don't mean like, because I'm such a great therapist, but what I mean is, I think people that have the ability to say, all right, I need to get help, to reach out to a therapist, and to get somebody to help them make that transition are going to be way less likely. Whereas I'm sure there's a good amount of people that do go back, and I suspect it's those people that leave and then get a studio apartment and never leave the house, and they just stew, and their cortisols are spiking, and it's just torture with nothing new or any joy
Nothing
coming
to replace
in.
it.
Yeah, I imagine people in those sort of situations, they're like, well, shit, if this is the option, then I guess the high control religion is better,
So when we punish prisoners and things like that, right? Like what's the worst thing we can do to somebody? Put them in solitary, right? Keep them away from other people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so unhealthy.
Yeah. Damage done when you're taking someone away from their support group at this hard time in their life, I imagine causes a lot of damage and a lot of scars.
Yeah, absolutely. But the message I keep trying to get across, and I talk about this in my podcast, and I try to put this energy out, is what I see very consistently. If people don't succumb to it, if they don't allow themselves to think, well, this is all this is, and this is all it'll ever be, anybody that applies themselves and says, okay, this is hard, and I'm going to have to make some new friends, and I'm going to have to learn some new things. Anybody who commits to that, I really haven't seen any exceptions where that doesn't produce a positive outcome. It's just sometimes, and for some situations, it's like saying, listen, man, you got 100 miles of glass to walk across in bare feet. On the other end of that, it's going to be beautiful, and we're going to give you foot rubs and whatever. But for now, it's going to hurt, and every step's going to hurt. And just, or like physical therapy might be a better example. When people lose use of their limbs, and they have to re-engage with that process, it's so painful. But if they commit to it and they do it, there's another side to get to.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to say we probably jumped to the E, right? I think, with focusing on shame there, I imagine, unless there's any other.
Yeah, I can that up. We did touch on that a little bit, but yeah, it's manipulating emotions in a way that creates dependency, guilt, fear, or loyalty. Um,
Mm,
let's see. I'm looking
fear.
through my
Fear's
notes here
probably a
real
big
quick
one.
to see what we already talked about. But
Okay, no problem.
using fear tactics, threats of punishment. We talked about that. Um, creating dependency on the group by making them feel like they owe the group everything, that they're nothing without them. This abusive relationships that sound very similar. There's inducing emotional highs such as love bombing, and lows or through public shaming. And then, yeah, teaching members that any happiness outside the group is impossible or sinful.
It really is. And I've been on this tangent lately that right now our society as a whole might feel like it's in a narcissistic relationship with politicians and just everything going on. In a lot of ways, like feeling like we're all being very gaslit during this time. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. And in a sense, it sounds very similar to that you're in this very weird, there's a lot of similarities to narcissism there, whether it's maybe the grandiosity of the authority of the higher power, but probably the religion as a whole, the grandiosity there. But all the other kind of manipulation tactics, and now that I think about this, probably a lot of these, I would almost have to imagine that many of these organizations are driven by people who probably tend a bit more on the narcissistic personality disorder than anything else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. When I used to work with the general population as a therapist, I would say maybe 20% of the people I worked with had parents who could fall on the narcissistic spectrum.
Yeah.
With the people I work with, it is like 85%.
Wow.
I mean, it is way up.
Wow.
It's to the point where they'll start telling me a little bit about
Yeah.
their parent, and then I will fill in the blanks and I'll go, do they also do this? And do they also do that? And they're like, yeah, it's just full blown. And the organizations themselves, usually as an entity, are narcissistic.
That actually brings out a point I was going to bring out, which was really funny that you brought up narcissism, Ryan, because I was going to say, so just like narcissism, you have to have these certain qualifying things. Of the bite method, does that organization have to have all of those qualities? Or what if they have like 2 of 4 of the qualities from the bite method? Is there like a limit, or is it like, this is usually just what it is?
I mean, the bite model really articulates, if all of the elements there are there, I think it's fair for us to call it a cult or a high control religion. But like everything, it exists on a spectrum. And these are things to watch out for, and here's the thing. Most of these things you will find in groups of any kind, us versus them mentality, and certain ideas that are promoted over others and that kind of thing. It's really just about the degree of control. Sometimes people will leave, and one of the hard things for former members is joining groups of any kind, because everything feels like a cult. Like everything just feels culty, and we have to develop this ability to be like, yeah, there's elements, but I can still exercise my own control and decision about whether I want to be part of this, how much I want to be a part of this. Yeah.
Cool.
Are you familiar with, do you know Kurt Metzger?
Not
He's a
familiar with that,
comedian that I like to follow him. And there's this guy, Jimmy Dore, they do this good political podcast. And it's fascinating. Kurt Metzger, I think he was a Jehovah's Witness. I'm not positive. He is now, self-admits that he's a massive conspiracy theorist, sort of because, he's kind of always watching and always very cautious of anything that exerts just a little more control than should be normal, maybe. I don't know. What is normal control versus extreme control?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the person and the situation, but we're all engaged in a dance all the time of trying to control others and letting ourselves be controlled. There's a part of us that wants to be in power, and there's very much a part of us that wants to follow and be led. And any situation you get into, there'll be some percentage of stuff that's feels a little not great, you know? And
Do
we
you
all
have
have
that?
to,
Do you have
but
that same sort of instinct or intuition now as you go about things? And are you still very cautious? I wonder like how you navigate
yeah, for a
making
while I was,
connection.
for many years. Now I think because I've developed a sense of self and ability to set boundaries, I feel more comfortable letting myself be taken for a ride. Sometimes I'll be in a situation and I can even see what's happening. And I'm like, all right, I'll go along with this because I know at any point I can just go, I don't want to do this anymore. And I've demonstrated to myself, I have done that many times. Like, nope, that's enough. I don't like this. I'm out. So I can feel safe
Yeah.
going on, letting myself be led.
That agency and that empowerment, learning that alone, having that freedom or just the awareness that you can say, no, this isn't for me. It has to be quite the skill and belief. I think maybe one of the bigger things that you've really kind of focused on or acquired in your journey here.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's one of the fundamental things in the work that I do with people first and foremost. Recently I've kind of this idea, which is so simple, but I'm realizing it's not obvious to the people I work with, which is it's okay to do the things that feel good and to not do the things that don't feel good. Period. That's it. You don't have to have a reason or a justification. You don't have to worry about what you're supposed to do or what other people are expecting of you. You can just use as a metric your life, like, this feels good. I'd like to do more of this. I don't know why, but this doesn't feel good, and I'm going to back off. But once you can kind of get in touch with that and really own that, then yeah, things become a lot easier and things become a lot less threatening and intimidating.
What are some of the best things that you've experienced since leaving? And somebody were listening to this and who happened to be stuck in any kind of high control situation that you would say, is on the other side of this. Maybe that's love, a loving romantic relationship. Maybe that's the freedom to travel, the freedom to believe different things.
Yeah, man, there's so much. Let's just start with like feeling things. Generally, when you're in this organization, because you're so shut down, you just don't feel things. Everything is this sort of monotone. You don't really feel fully joy, and you don't really feel even some of the negative stuff, anger, whatever. But being able to feel the full range of the emotion, to authentically have an experience of being excited, looking forward, having hope. But then there's just all the stuff that you're not supposed to do that are great in life. Sex is great. Sex is amazing. And yeah, not that I'm saying you should go out and try all drugs, but the experimenting there is fun and interesting and world expanding and
Just
making
like caffeine or nicotine, right? That some
yeah,
people haven't tried. Yeah.
yeah,
You know what I think
yeah.
is funny is in most organizations, alcohol is totally fine, but you make such bad decisions if you drink alcohol. But there's things that grow here on this earth that you
Yes.
literally cannot overdose on, and you don't make bad decisions on them. And it
No,
totally
I
blows
know.
my mind that's acceptable.
There are these beautiful plants that help stimulate neuron growth, and there's no hangover, and you feel enlightened, and you learn things about yourself, and you let go of things you've been hanging on to, and it's like pretty much nothing but healthy. But yeah, the things that are allowed are the things that keep people dull and worn down and stuck in their bullshit, and are not. It doesn't contribute to them thriving.
Really, that emotional control, that last piece, I don't know, it really hit me there of, when you grow up in a really invalidating environment, right? You got excited about, you got an A on a test, right? And then your dad sees it and he's like, yeah, well, you also got a B on this one. So pipe down, or you skinned your knee and you're hurt and you're crying. And maybe that same dad is then, well, suck it up. You're fine. So now your negative emotions are told to kind of come up. Your more positive, joyful emotions are told to come down. And so they really learn to operate in this very kind of small window of emotion. And, you
Yeah.
never maybe go up above a 6, you never go below a 4. And yet inside, you're probably still feeling all of those very same things. But now you're, you've learned all these different mechanisms to control them. Yeah. And we want to experience love at a 10. We want to experience sadness at a 0 or even
Yeah.
-5 or something like that. Because really that is the beauty of life, is to, at least for me, is experience. I love different experiences, and I think it's so often to feel this wide range of emotions, and
It
my heart,
feels
like,
like so
is
much
really going
growth.
out to those. No.
Yeah, it feels like so much growth experiencing things and doing things for the first time that make you feel joy and make you feel real pleasure for the first time.
Yeah, like authentic surprise and joy.
Exactly.
Or even things like accomplishment, like being able to say, I would like to
Cool.
do that and I'd like to get good at that. I'd like to go for my education or I'd like to get that job. Pride is usually another one that's not allowed. Just being like, wow, look what I did. That's a beautiful feeling. And yeah, and even the other stuff took me a little while to get there, but like, I'm not gonna say I love feeling sad, but I've
Mhm.
developed a different relationship where I'm like, oh, that's what's coming up right now. And that's what I need to be with. And when I can be with that and be present, fully present, there's meaning in it. It gives color and texture to the
Yeah.
rest of life. And it's inversely related to the degree to which the amount of joy I can feel, to the depth of the hard stuff that I can feel.
Yeah. So how long were you out of of your organization before you decided to become a therapist and realize that you could help other people?
How long was I out of the organization? So I started my first therapy when I was 27, so almost 10 years out of the organization. And then I think within a year of doing therapy, I was like, I had this insight and I'm like, wait a minute, this is a job? So, basically, we would have these conversations, sort of like the ones we're having right now, which I'm just endlessly fast. I've always been interested in like, why do you do what you do? And how does it work? And what are all the emotions at play? And that was just what I like to do in my daily life anyways. And I'm like, oh, that's what therapy is? Because that's what I already do that kind of. Yeah, from that point, I was like, all right, I'm going back to school, got my doctorate by 35. So that was about 6 years later. And yeah, and then spent a little time working in the tech industry in San Francisco. And then about 5 years ago, I lost that job and decided, all right, well, maybe now's the time to try to be, to be that therapist that I was always looking for myself, somebody who knew what the hell I was talking about.
So you started this just before COVID then?
Yeah, a year or two before COVID.
I imagine that threw a wrench in your plans too, or did that really make your practice grow more? Because I know there's been a lot of changes in life after COVID.
No, it was great for my practice and just for the overall hope that people will leave. Most of these organizations keep people very busy with, religious activities. So COVID all of a sudden prevented them from doing all those things. And they found themselves with a lot of time on their hands and a computer in front of them that was a window into a world of information. And I have heard so many stories where people were like, I was a hardcore believer. And then sometime over COVID, I sat down at the computer and I just took a leap of faith and started looking at information. And 3 hours later, I was done with the whole thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. And that was actually one of my questions in a way, or curiosities was, how are these organizations going to survive in this information age? Yeah, it's got to be harder and harder to enforce sort of the bite manipulations mechanisms. And yeah, and I personally hope that, this is one of the beauties of sort of, this vast amount of information out there is in just, this podcast that we're doing right now. Maybe somebody listens to it and realizes, that there is this pretty amazing life, maybe outside of that control. There's an amazing psychologist that specializes in this and can walk you through it.
Yeah, I mean, here would be my greatest wish is that there has been a trend that the religious attendance in general has just been declining for quite a while because of this age of information. And so, yeah, I would love to think that these sort of things will just kind of die out. But knowing human nature, I think these things will always have a place. I think they may dwindle. And what I suspect is the world is getting crazier. And as soon as we get, whether it be global warming or, I don't know, terrorist attack, there's going to be something that'll shake people up. And when people are shaken up, they are drawn to something that seems to have the answers and gives them a sense of predictability and safety and tells them what to do when they don't know what the hell to do themselves. So I don't think I'll ever be out of the job.
Just like COVID.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, man, Dr. Ryan, thank you so much for being here today. This is such a cool conversation. I know that you've helped a lot of people, and I'm really glad that you were able to join on and talk about this subject today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor.
Oh, and if you don't mind, I would just like to plug my
I was going to say,
website.
please tell us where our listeners can find you and listen to you.
Yeah, if you're interested in working with me or learning about what I do, you can go to drryanlee.com. I also put out a podcast once a week called Welcome to the World, which is basically they're bite-sized episodes, 20 to 30 minutes on specific topics that are common or ubiquitous to people who are leaving these high control religions. We talk about how to tell your family, how to come out, how to navigate the transition, how to make friends, how to break free from black and white thinking, how to find purpose, all of these things. So yeah, you can find that Welcome to the World on any podcast platforms.
Great.
Are you on social media or Instagram or anything like that? We can find.
I am currently, I'm old. I'm in my 40s and I'm still using I'm on Facebook right now, but I'm realizing I got to start doing some Insta and TikTok, and I'm getting around to it. But Ryan Lee ID on Facebook if you're interested in finding me there.
Perfect.
Perfect.
And it's probably healthier being off those things too.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to another episode of Hey Man, It's Okay. Make sure to follow us on social media at Hey Man, It's Okay. Check out our website, heymanitsokay.com, and follow us, subscribe, leave comments, send us emails. We are getting ready. We're recording season 3 now, so we need some episode ideas, guys, and send us your questions.
Yeah, we'd love to hear thoughts, comments, opinions, all the above. And again, thank you, Dr. Ryan. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And until next time, everybody, from Ryan and Sky, it's okay to not be okay. Thanks for joining.